Alan, good to see you. How are you?
Nice to see you.
So, for those people who don't know, Alan is a food and drug lawyer, just like myself, and we've connected multiple times. And he's been a guest on this podcast before. It's been fun, and we're actually having another podcast on what has the first 18 months under Trump been like. Where does it lead us? What is it going to look like? And to the extent we can magic eight ball this, what do the next couple of years look like under Trump? So that's going to be interesting and exciting. Obviously, as I can tell, it's been a very, very boring period under Trump. Nothing's changed. So there's all of that. But Alan, you seem to know more about the stuff than I do. So tell me more about what's been going on under Trump. What do you think are the big highlights that you've been advising clients about?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's always enjoyable. I'm going to try not to get political, but I'll try to say things that I think are kind of understood by anybody, no matter their political persuasion. Yes. But I think it's fair to say that the FDA, like the rest of the Trump administration, is sort of a interesting day by day, half day by half day kind of situation. Commissioners come and go. Center directors come and go. And so that's, it's a little ever evolving. How about that? Not quite like a UFC match, but certainly challenging. We'll just say it that way. I've done this for 33 years, just food and drug law, and it's certainly been, I would say, challenging in many ways for clients. And I would say also for the FDA. From the FDA side, it's not a secret that Doge and Elon Musk knocked out a lot of good people, and who either left because they were let go or RIFT, reduction in force, or they left because they just did not feel as committed as they were, or they just felt they were not appreciated, and they either took early retirement, the package, or they have gone elsewhere. And when you have that kind of issue, I think you have a morale issue. You certainly have a resource or lack of resource issue, and you have a kind of a lack of experience issue. You have a lot of young people who are probably very skilled, but probably don't have a lot of experience, and I would put that kind of in air quotes. I can have a lot of young associates, first and second years, who did very well in law school, and have probably done very well in their first and second year, but there's something to be said for the proverbial gray hair. Darshan, I know you wouldn't know about that, but I've got a little bit. And so I think,
no hair, so there's that.
Well, I wasn't going to go there, but what I was going to say was that I think that there's something when you lose experience and sometimes common sense and relationships. And I think morale is not great. And so I think that that's an FDA issue. And as a result, that becomes somewhat of an industry issue. People that you used to be able to talk to, or they're not as, they're either not available at all, or they're newer people, and maybe you thought when you were doing your regulatory process, clinical development process, you thought you had a path, or you thought you knew who the players were going to be. And, as that path has gone on, these people have left, which of course can be disconcerting if you thought you had an understanding. I guess on the other hand, it could be maybe enlightening, that maybe you'll get sort of a new view. And I think that that's what the administration, what FDA would try to say is it's a new pair of eyes, and that the old way wasn't perfect. And so getting a new pair of eyes is useful. Some specific areas, if I may, if we look, let's say, prescription drug promotion, we've certainly seen more enforcement or more letters, notice of violations, sometimes referred as untitled letters, or warning letters that are sent to drug companies because of unlawful promotion. And there's been a particular focus on direct-to-consumer advertising. In a given year, when you and I were young pups, you might see 10, 15 letters, and yet now we're seeing that can be in a half of a year, and even late last year we saw several issued in one day, where FDA was able to use AI, or at least everyone thinks that they used AI to look at certain materials very quickly. I think that's a little bit of indicative of Senator Kennedy and certain members of Congress who have had concerns about direct-to-consumer advertising and some skepticism or cynicism about the pharmaceutical industry. So we've seen that in social media. We've seen that generally with direct-to-consumer. As it relates to certain things in the food space, Make America Healthy Again, food areas, dietary supplements, maybe even in the exosomes areas or peptides, we've certainly seen at least policy statements issued by, Senator Kennedy or the commissioner talking about, alternatives or challenging certain beliefs or certain things that the agency had done in the past, whether that was COVID treatments, whether or not it's autism, certain things that, I think that the agency had dispelled certain concerns or had raised the bar in some areas, and this administration either challenging those areas and kind of elevating others. Some think that's a good thing. Some, particularly in the science world, are concerned. And I think as are so many people at FDA themselves. But again, I don't want to speak for everyone at the FDA, nor should I. But I think that debate is one. It's certainly in the national sphere. I do think that we've seen with this administration, and I would say with other administrations, often there will be a policy or an initiative that doesn't necessarily get executed. I don't want to call it merely a bumper sticker, but it's not difficult for a politician or a secretary or a president to say this should be a focus. And then when you get to the worker bees, they either don't do it at all or maybe slow walk it or what have you. So, it's a little bit like the Seinfeld episode, anyone can make a reservation, but it's the hold. Anyone can sort of make a proclamation. It doesn't necessarily need to be executed. That's one of the reasons why, I think, to use your phrase, the magic 8 ball, it's difficult to sort of determine where we'll be tomorrow, where we'll be Wednesday and Thursday. Because again, policies or at least initiatives can be posted on FDA's website. We're going to look into this, we're going to look into that. Doesn't necessarily mean that it actually happens. As it relates to enforcement, I would say more on the manufacturing side. I think I haven't really done a numbers crunch, but it feels as though there's been a lot more enforcement ex-US, certainly about products being held up at the border. We certainly have seen that with clients, API manufacturers, where there have been quality issues in certain countries, China, India, et cetera. I don't know that it's numerically more. It just seems like that there's a lot of that, which as a result has a bearing on new drug approvals. If your API was, based on an ex-US manufacturer, or you're doing clinical trials, and again, the drug was coming from outside the United States, that of course can have, a slowdown. We also have some clients who are ex-US based, particularly in the OTC space, where there've been more, I won't call them virtual inspections, but there've been requests by email where FDA has a laundry list of things that they want to see because they can't get to certain countries because of either war and strife or budgets or whatever. And they'll basically say, okay, Darshan Pharmaceuticals, we want to see the following things. It's as though FDA was doing an inspection, but they're not physically on site, and then they're allowing the company to respond, over time. So we've seen more of that, again, particularly in the OTC space. Of course, there was a recent announcement last week on a new sunscreen active. So I would say it's a lot of stuff I've thrown out there, but what I would say is a little bit more focus on the consumer from a direct-to-consumer and OTC, OTC drugs, OTC medical devices, dietary supplements, products that consumers can get more quickly than, let's say, prescription-wise. Whether you want to call that paternalistic, and if that's a good word or it's a bad word, I do think that there is maybe a cynicism or skepticism of some in senior roles at FDA and in HHS that are maybe doubtful of some of the industry, and therefore the agency needs to either get the industry to lighten up, in some regards, or needs to put more safeguards around OTC or DTC because of concerns about safety or deception. Let me stop there and just those are things that come to mind.
Those are some great points. So let me sort of tear back some of the comments you're making. So I think the first thing that kind of popped up for me was I've been doing this for about 25 years, something like that. And I can't remember if there has been such a strident difference in sort of upheaval in the FDA's perspective before. That's not to say it hasn't. It's just I don't remember that being the case. Maybe I was just too young and naive when it happened. But it's changing how my clients are seeing the FDA. One of the things that kind of popped up for me is you mentioned a few seconds ago this the new sunscreen, for example. I think that that's really indicative of the administration's perspective overall, where the original FDA, when I think of it, and original as in 2 years ago, but it sort of took the role that, you know what, patient safety is more important. I would argue that now they've sort of shifted into innovation is more important. And I'm not judging that for one way or the other, but I would argue that that is the new perspective. And if that is true, we're seeing that in the context of peptides. We're seeing that in the context of new regulatory pathways. And how do you bring products to the market with less onerous demands? Go ahead. Do you have a different take on that?
No, and I think you're absolutely right. I think a little bit, I think in general you see that with the Republican administration, it's just a philosophy of less regulation. Regulation, encumbers innovation and creativity, and so it's all these regulations that are stopping innovation. So we need to open it up and sort of let the industry act responsibly, and versus, let's say, in general, Democrats are probably a little bit more government oversight, government regulation, and certainly this administration, both as the president being very pro-business, and I think Commissioner Kennedy, Secretary Kennedy, being more of a alternative, outside the box, maybe distrustful of a past FDA and or industry. I think that's probably correct. And of course, the Commissioner McCary, who had also written about certain things that kind of challenged what I think many thought were things really not to be challenged. And I think sort of that some would say it's outside the box and it's good, verifiable trust. And some would say it's outside the box and a little loony. It depends on, I guess, your view on things.
And that's sort of been my overall take, right? I feel like if we are going to move towards a more innovative strategy, I think that there is something to be said for, in that scenario, we want you to be more cautious. I think DOGE neutered the ability for the FDA to do that exact sort of, we're going to be more innovative, but we're going to be more cautious as a result of that. So I was just reading about 10 minutes ago that the IRS went from 100,000 employees to something like 70,000, or if not less.
Right. Which
means that they've lost the ability to enforce the rules. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not really rooting for the IRS to be
I understand.
But I would argue that that's something similar that's happened to the FDA. And I would argue that to the unusual strategies you're talking about, it reminds me of the UFC in the front lawn, in that it's extremely non-traditional. I can't tell you what's wrong with it because why not? But on the other hand, it just seems like the wrong tone. But is that just because I'm used to something?
I think you're right, and I think you've got two things. One is I think you've got government people basically attacking FDA as an institution, and therefore it's lawyers kind of joke about lawyer jokes and all of that because we'll sometimes say we're laughing all the way to the bank, okay? But these are FDA officials. Well, most are good. There's some that are probably not as good, but they could probably make double, if not a triple, what they want in industry but they're doing this because they truly believe in something. And to be attacked by their own bosses, if you will, or by the president, or by, you know, it's just not good for morale. And so there is one thing. And then I think that there's also the idea of trying to letting go so many people, not necessarily increasing funding, saying we're going to do more with less. And the danger with that, sometimes it can work, and that's certainly every institution or organization tries to be more efficient. Law firms are no exception. But you want to be careful that you don't cut to the bone, and or that you are telling the staff you have to work faster because there's, our philosophy is to get more products out there, and there's less of it. And so our reviewers feeling pressure to sign off on things faster or to come up with policies faster than they might have done. I don't know. Again, there's something to be said for getting a good kick in the tush to move a little bit more efficiently, and sometimes you don't need as many people as you have. But the industry is not shrinking. The industry is getting bigger. More applications are coming in. More people are making products. It's an international industry, okay? And so I just think that there's a lot of demands on an institution that's being attacked, and is being asked to do more with less. And while we hope that that's not going to result in some major, issue, there is a little bit of that concern. And what it will look like, I don't know. But haste can make waste, and haste can also make a big problem. And I think that's what some people are afraid of, and that a lot of good people, and that people will also maybe not be interested in joining the FDA because of sort of the hit that it's taken. Is this a place, even if I wanted to go there, am I going to be looking over my shoulder, either because I'm going to get let go or because somebody more senior is going to, veto my view. The previous commissioner had stated that, he got more involved in certain decisions that I don't think previous commissioners had done. There had actually been letters sent from, center directors on advertising and promotion she'd never seen before. I think the unusualness of it, the method of madness, if you want to call it that, whether or not it's good or bad, I don't want to, I don't know. What I would say is the uncertainty makes industry uncomfortable. It's no different than Wall Street. When Wall Street has more certainty, it'll either go up or it'll go down. It's when things are not certain. I mean, we only have to look at recent issues, with Iran. Okay, one day we're going to have a peace, and then all of a sudden we're not going to have it, and the market's going up, and the market's going down. Okay, or things about NVIDIA, and if NVIDIA has a bad quarter, all of a sudden does that mean everybody else is going to have a bad quarter? And that's when the market gets nervous because they don't have certainty. And I think that's also what happens to industry is they're kind of like, well, they're saying X, but I'm working on Y. Is that an opportunity? Is there an opportunity because there's a new FDA, or am I going to, pardon me, get screwed? Okay, and so all I can tell clients is you can complain about it, say it's good, bad, or indifferent. It doesn't really matter. All I can tell them is here's where we are today. As of Monday, these are the rules. Okay, could it change Tuesday? I guess. Okay, but let's assume it doesn't. Okay, and and FDA is not going to change everything overnight. And so let's always remember safety, efficacy, and quality. Okay, when it comes to manufacturing and getting product approval. If it's advertising promotion, truthful, not misleading. Don't promote off-label. Be truthful and not misleading. If it's clinical data, typically 2 adequate and well-controlled studies. Although now we obviously know that there can be 1. Go with the tried and true that's lasted since 1906, and be prepared for hiccups along the way.
Now, you said something interesting a few minutes ago where you talked about international. In your perspective, seeing overall, are you seeing a trend that the administration? I mean, we saw the Make in America push that happened early in the administration. I haven't heard as much about it right now, but I can't tell. My clients are not sort of importing the products in the same way. So what are your clients? What are the general trends you're seeing? N of 1.
Well, we have seen some clients, more larger companies that are setting up shop or building more in the United States, a new plant or things like that. which of course is, I think, a nod to the current administration, sort of America First, and all the benefits that go with that, and conversely, I won't say the non-benefits, but the potential implications of not. Certainly, the U.S. market has always been the largest market. So whether it's for economics or because of political pressures, I think we've seen that. We have had a number of questions. It's not my area. I have another party who deals with a couple partners who deal with the tariffs issues, which is not FDA as much as sort of it's tariffs. I would say that as a food and drug lawyer, I don't get the questions about should we set up a corporate entity in the United States. Those are my tax partners, those are my corporate partners, maybe the lawyers who advise on tariffs. But I will get questions about more, we have facilities, manufacturing facilities overseas, and because they are having issues with FDA, whether or not it's because they've always had issues with FDA, whether it was this administration or past because of quality issues, or because FDA may be holding up these products more because not America First, we need to start thinking about setting up an alternate supplier in the United States or building something in the United States. And what do we need to think about from an FDA perspective? Registration, listing, GMP. That's how those issues are coming to me. More about the concerns of having an ex-US partner or an ex-US manufacturing facility and FDA's view about that and how should they deal with it from a regulatory perspective, less corporate tax tariff focused.
But let's take exactly the perspective you're talking about. So let's ignore the other factors.
Yeah.
Overall, as a trend,
yeah,
are you seeing more companies saying, is it more in the I'm gonna wait for things to stabilize? Is it more that we're going to start bringing products back to the U.S.? Is it more we've already brought products and we're looking for more suppliers?
Yeah, our client base, the firm, we're about 200 lawyers, general practice, but in our FDA group, we are primarily advise small to mid-sized companies, drug device, biologic, cosmetic, food. So what I'm seeing is that the larger companies, the bigger pharmas, the bigger device companies, they might have already been thinking about it. It might have been in their plans anyway to set up more of a shop in the U.S. if they were ex-U.S. And now they're proceeding. I think it's more difficult for smaller companies that frankly have limited, they don't have the money, they don't have the infrastructure. So if they set up a U.S. shop, it's more for distribution, it's more for business development, but they're really not saying, hey, if I'm ex-U.S., I need to set up something in the United States because of, Buy America or America First. Their attitude is, it's all we can do to keep our clinical trial funded and to get investments. And so while they may think about it down the road, they're kind of counting their pennies now because they've got it here and now. I think a larger company has the flexibility and maybe more of the resources to think more about kind of the America First concept.
Which takes me to this interesting thing, and maybe it's just the type of people I'm interacting with,
Yeah.
but I've gotten more and more people talk about Australia recently. I don't know if that's true or it's just the clients I'm dealing with or the people I'm dealing with, but they have this new regulatory pathway. They have this regulatory pathway that speeds things up a little bit. And I've seen, come to Australia, we'll do this. And then Europe is going, okay, we may have pushed too far in this whole data thing. Are you seeing U.S. companies go, I don't want to go outside the U.S. because it's just more stuff to deal with, or it's worth it because we're dealing with a global audience?
Yeah, and that's a great question. We do a little bit of work in Australia, but not enough that I can say if there's a trend or not. I would say, we do a fair amount of work with European clients dealing with the U.S. What I would say is, let's just take the device industry just for example. I think there was a time when people would say, I'm going to get CE mark, so I got some sales, and then I'll come to FDA, and then I'll come in with a 510K. Then EU got a little more difficult, so companies said, well, hell, if I've only got so much time and money, and I was going to go to the FDA first, I was going to get to the U.S. market, I'll go to the U.S. market, because the EU got more difficult. I think when companies, I guess what I would say is ex-US companies, I think are looking more at that US versus ex-US, whether that's in Australia or Europe or Asia versus the US, because again, while the US may be the ultimate market, if I can get some wins, if you will, or it's not as laborious to go to South Korea or Australia or EU or name your region, and I can get some sales, and then I can get some data, and then come to US, they're going to do that. That's just to them good business. I think it depends on the product, and I mean product that could be drug, device, biologic, and I think to some extent it may also depend within that what type of product, what type of medical device, what type of drug, what type of biologic, if you will. We've certainly seen more of, and this just may be the nature of our practice, we've certainly received more ex-US work in food lately, where they're asked, ex-US companies, it may just be we've developed a little bit more of a niche with certain countries, and so we're getting referrals. I think that's just, again, doing business in the United States. So I think companies are always looking at the regulatory landscape for any area, particularly ex-US, and I would also say kind of smaller companies. Again, if they can work in parallel, that's big pharma and big device companies can work in parallel. But again, if I only have so much money, I have to sort of figure out where can I get the biggest bang for my buck. I use a baseball analogy. I say sometimes you can go for the home run, and that's exciting if you get it, and fireworks go off, and loud music goes on the goes in the stadium. But there's only one way to hit a home run, and yours truly, who's 5'8", 5'9", in heels, is not going to hit a home run anytime soon. Okay, but there's about 10 ways now to get to first base. So maybe at least I get in the game. Okay, and then I can go base to base. So sometimes I tell my client or tell our clients, it may be more methodical and it may even be longer, okay, long term to get the holy grail, but at least I'm in the game, and then I can go base to base to base. Even let's say a 510K, I can make my product, if I get it cleared, I can make that the predicate. Or if it's a new drug application, I can come in with a supplemental application. I go base to base to base versus trying to go for the home run. And I think, I would say that whether you're a small company or large company, but I would also say that to a company outside the United States to try to figure out, is it better to try to go this buy America or get in America first versus an ex-US region? I said a lot there, but I just wanted to give you sort of how I would advise a client.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I'll obviously this podcast turned into more of an international discussion. So Let me ask one last international question. What is your take right now with that exact US ex-US with the perspective of China specifically? And what I mean by that is with things like the Biosecure Act, with the bulk data rule, with these laws basically saying don't do as much business in China, which is the exact inverse of where we were, say, 5-10 years ago. Are you seeing companies hedge their bets? Are you seeing companies go, we're still going to do it, or there is a choice?
Yeah, you may follow this more than me. What I've noticed is that a lot of companies are seemingly doing business with, Asian biotech companies. Okay, where U.S. companies are doing a deal with, whether that's China or Korea, those companies, whether or not it's that they are supporting. Since I'm not, a corporate lawyer, I don't know how much of it is, Minsk engages with, Darshan and Asia to try to develop products, Asian products for ultimate U.S. And we'll let you do all the hard lifting, but we'll fund you because maybe the regulatory processes, or I don't know, maybe it's cheaper to do it. I'm not really sure. So I guess I'm not seeing companies not do business. They seem to be doing a lot of licensing or development businesses. Since I don't know the terms of the contracts, I'm not exactly sure which way that's going. I certainly would say where I would agree with you, not that I would disagree with you on the other, but what I guess I would say is certainly there is a perception, right or wrong, I don't want to judge, that APIs made in China or sometimes in India or other regions are not quite up to snuff when it comes to FDA. And so many companies may be resistant to set up, to rely on an API manufacturer in China, or setting up clinical trials in China because of either quality-related issues, which existed this administration, or because of the existing administration, and sometimes the political tug of war that the U.S. has with China. They would be kind of caught in the middle, either getting blacklisted or getting all kinds of hurdles thrown at them, or what have you. But I guess I haven't seen it go down to zero, because I guess I feel like I'm seeing, at least in the news, where U.S. companies are doing deals with Asian companies. I can't recall if they're China-centric, but I think many are, particularly in the biologics area. So I don't know what the answer is in that regard. But I would say, from a quality manufacturing perspective, I would be I do think companies are a little more adverse to, or at least having a backup plan. I'll say it that way, having a backup plan.
So I'll give you my perspective, because it's been a sharing both ways. What I found interesting is I've seen a lot of work from Japan recently, and I've seen a lot of work from China, but they're out licensing stuff from China. Use and things like the Biosecure Act is making me go, okay, so how do I share pharmacovigilance data back to China? Because that's going to be part of the terms of use and part of the licensing terms. So it's become more complicated. And there's a recognition that you have to share this data, but it's unclear how it's going to play out long term. We can keep doing this because this is obviously a fun conversation, but
well, it's like the magic 8 ball. It's like, okay, what will Tuesday look like? Come back to me on Wednesday. Okay, good question. Ask me on Wednesday. I mean, I think what the podcast has shown, what I think your questions show, is that there's a lot of questions. There's not a lot of definitive answers. But there's kind of what we have seen based on experience, both you and me, what we're hearing, and kind of the best we can advise our clients based on the information that we have today, knowing that information or that guidance could change as other things change.
So, Alan, before we let you go, what's the best way for people to reach you?
Email Alan, ALAN, .Minsk, MINSK, and Alan, G as in George.com. You can always, reach me by LinkedIn, but you got my email address. Phone number is 404-873-8690, 404-873-8690. I just find more people reach out to me through email and occasionally through LinkedIn, but I'm happy to talk to anybody at any time.
Perfect. And you can scan my QR code, which is on the left-hand side. But thank you, Alan, for being on. This was awesome.
Thank you.
And I look forward to doing more of these.
Always enjoy it. Have a good one. Take care, guys.
Thank you for staying on. Most people lose their